Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the share this evening. It's really a great honor and privilege to welcome my dear colleague and friend, Rabbi Roselaar. Rabbi Roselaar is, of course, the Rav of our neighboring community, Ali Tzion, where he's been since, I think, 2010. Before that, he was Rav in Belmont and Watford communities, and is a proud modern Orthodox religious Zionist Talmud Chacham who is known for his learning and ability to share it. So it's really a great pleasure and privilege to be able to host Rabbi Roselaar here this evening. And thank you so much, Rabbi Roselaar, for joining us. The subject tonight is Shtarei Hedyotot, reading newspapers on Shabbat. And Rabbi Roselaar, very much looking forward to hearing you, and thank you so much for sharing your Torah with us. For those who haven't seen, I'll just post it one more time, but there's a source sheet which we emailed to the community earlier, but I'll post it also on the chat function, so anyone who hasn't had a chance can download it from there. And so without further ado, over to you, Rabbi Roselaar.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Lovely to be part of Kilat Ner Yisrael this evening, and to speak on Rabbi Zobin's turf. When Aaron Lovett asked me for some titles, I gave him a whole range of topics that I could speak on. He said he'd run them through Rabbi Zobin and decide which one they wanted. And they got back to me saying that the topic of Shtarei Hedyotot and reading newspapers on Shabbat. So I don't know if this is a drum that Rabbi Zobin wants to bang, or that he's had too many balabatim coming up to him on the Shabbat morning saying, "Did you see the paper this morning?" So maybe that's the background to it, or also maybe this is Talmud Torah Lishma. But it's actually a topical issue. It's something that halacha that we're going to see appears in Shulchan Aruch, and is to a large degree honored in the breach, I think, perhaps more than in the observance thereof. And I really want to take the opportunity of going through the sugya. It might well be that by the time we get to the end, that people will be more confused than they were before we started. And if that's the case, then no doubt you'll turn to Rabbi Zobin for Psak Halacha L'Maaseh. I understand that everybody's got a copy of the Daf Mekorot. It came out a little bit fuzzy, I'm afraid, when I scanned it through, but I'm sure you should be able to see it. And please, as we go through, if you've got questions, then I think you can unmute yourselves or put your hand up in the chat or something like that, and we can make this somewhat interactive as well. So I want to start with a Mishnah on Daf Kuf Mem Chet Amud Bet in Masechet Shabbat, a Mishnah which says as follows: Moneh, and it's right at the bottom of the page. Moneh Adam et orchotav et paprotav mipiv, aval lo min haktav. So a person is allowed to count their guests or the food that they're serving orally, aval lo min haktav, but not reading it out from a list. If we look at Rashi tells us paprotav, that means minei ma'adanim, the things that you're serving at the meal. Aval lo min haktav, im kataf be'erev Shabbat, kach v'kach orchim. Person writes a list of who's coming for the meal on Shabbat. They've written this out before Shabbat. Ploni floni zimanti. I've invited so and so and so and so, kadei shelo yishkachem, so that you don't forget them. Lo yikra ba'oto kataf b'Shabbat. You're not allowed to read that list on Shabbat. So this is a very interesting scenario. And if we are paskening exactly as the Mishnah says, then this is to be a very realistic situation. You've got guests coming. Could be it's a 3-day Yom Tov, and you've invited a number of people for meals over the course of the Chag. You want to do Haknasat Orchim, and it's the 3rd day of Yom Tov, and you can't remember who you're supposed to be bringing home from shul with you. So you pull out the list. You've got a list in your pocket or in your machzor or stuck up on the kitchen, whatever it is. You want to know who you should be bringing home with you. According to this Mishnah, one isn't allowed to read out that list on Shabbat. Now, the big question is going to be, why not? And let's turn over the page now to Kuf Mem Tet Amud Aleph. We're going to go through the sugya in the Gemara. We'll go through probably most of this Amud, and then look at some shitot in the Rishonim and shitot in the Achronim as well. So the Gemara says, "My Tama, what's the reason that you can't read it out from the Ketav? You can't read it out from a written list." Rav Bivi Amar Gzeira Shema Yimchok. So Rav Bivi says, we're concerned that you might come to alter the list. You might come to cross out one or two of the names. Look at Rashi. My Tama Valom Min Haktav. What's the reason that you can't to read it out from the text? Shema Yimchok Min HaOrchim. Perhaps you'll cross out some of the guests. Sheyiresh Elo Heikin Lahem Kol Tzorkam. You'll realize that you really haven't got enough food for them. It's Yom Tov was Thursday, Friday, Shabbat, and it comes to Shabbat, and all the kugel and all the meat got eaten over Yom Tov, and you're down to just not so much for the last meals, and you can't bring back 10 people with you from shul. You can only bring back 6. So you haven't actually told them that you've invited them yet. You're going to approach them in shul, so you want to cross out some names so that you won't bring too many people home with you. You regret that you invited too many people. So you you cross them out so that when you give the list to the hospitality manager or gabbai in shul, that he won't invite extra people that you haven't got space for. So that's Rav Bivi's concern. Rav Bivi says that you can't read Min HaKetav in case you come to cross it out. Abaye Amar Gezeira Shema Yikra Shtarei Hedyotot. So Abaye said, we're worried that you might come to read from Shtarei Hedyotot. So there seems to be an issa against reading Shtarei Hedyotot. A shtar is, of course, a shtar is a document, and Shtarei Hedyot is what we say somebody who's not an expert at something. So Shtarei Hedyotot means just normal documents. As we'll see a machloket in the Rishonim what we mean by that. But we'll leave it in its original Hebrew, Shtarei Hedyotot, for the time being. So Rav Bivi says we're worried that you'll do the melacha of mochek, and Abaye says we're worried that you'll come to read Shtarei Hedyotot. My beinahu. So what would be a nafkamina between these two opinions? Ika beinahu, a nafkamina would be the katava akotel umidle. You've written it on the wall and it's high up. So I don't think that necessarily means that you got out a pen necessarily and wrote it on the wall. It might be that you wrote it on a piece of paper and you put it high up. If we're worried about you rubbing it out, so in this case we're not so worried. Why not? Because it's high up. You're not going to go and get a ladder and then climb up. So you've put it sort of, on your top cupboards in your kitchen. You've stuck pieces of paper for each day of Yom Tov with who you're going to bring back from shul. So Shema Yimchok isn't a concern. But Tulamanda Amar Shema Yikra, but if we're worried that you might read Shtarei Hedyotot, then Chashinan, we are concerned about it. Let's just look at Rashi. I want to look at the penultimate wide line. So it's the third line from the top in Rashi. And Rashi says as follows: Kol Hane Shema Yikra Shtarei Hedyotot. When all these concerns that a person might read Shtarei Hedyotot, shall mekach umimkar ka'amar. What Shtarei Hedyotot? Now, this is a very important shita in Rashi. He's saying that it's shall mekach umimkar, business papers. So it's like, Shtarei Hedyotot is your bank statement. That would be the best example, or an invoice that you've received, or a bill that you're sending. All these things are business-related documents. And it would seem from this Rashi that Shtarei Hedyotot does not include what we're going to see is called Igeret Shlomim. So a letter that somebody sent you, a postcard from the south of France, or a newspaper. That doesn't seem to be Shtarei Hedyotot according to this explanation in Rashi. If you look across the road, as it were, at Tosfot in the top left-hand corner, Tosfot says B'Shtarei Hedyotot, Perish B'Kuntra Shel Mekuch Mimkar. So he quotes Rashi and says, yeah, we're talking about business documents. Ula'el B'Feret Kol Kitvei. But previously, Rashi's explained Otaf Kuftet Zayin, Piresh Igarot Hashluchot Limso Chayfetz. Just social letters. Social letters are also prohibited, according to Rashi on Daf Kuftet Zayin. So we've got two shitot in Rashi. What's going to be prohibited under the rubrics of Shtarei Hedyotot. So to go back to our Gemara, we had a machloket between Rav Bivi, or we have a machloket between Rav Bivi and Abaye. What's the reason for not being able to read a list out of the Ketav? Whether it's because we're concerned that you might come to erase, or we're concerned that you might read Shtarei Hedyotot, which is prohibited. And we said there was enough kamina if it's high up. Lamanda Amar Shema Yimchok. If we're worried about erasing it, lo chayshinan, then you don't need to worry. Lamanda Amar Shema Yikra chayshinan. But if we say we're worried that you might read, then we'll make this. We'll say you can't read the names off the list. Ulamanda Amar Shema Yimchok. So if we say the concern is that you might rub it out, Neichus Shema Yikra. Well, why isn't he worried also about the issa of reading Shtarei Hedyotot? This Gemara is assuming that everybody agrees there's an issa against reading Shtarei Hedyotot, and this is going to be important in the Hemshech, in the continuation of the sugya. So why is Rav Bivi not concerned that a person might not come to read, but a person might come to read Shtarei Hedyotot? The two, and furthermore, l'shema yimchok lo chayshinan, are we really not worried that you might climb up on a ladder and rub it out? But Tanya, let me bring you a brighter, which shows a parallel case where we are worried about such things. The Gemara says, Lo yikra lo or haner. This is in the second perek. Everybody's familiar with this sugya. Lo yikra lo or haner. A person is not allowed to. Sorry, in the first perek, a person is not allowed to read on Shabbat. Lo or haner, by the light of an oil lamp. Why not? Because we're concerned that you might adjust the flame on Shabbat. But Amar Rabba, and Rabba said, Afilu gavor shtei komot, afilu gavor shtei mardaot, afilu asara batim ze'al gabei zeh. Even if it's very high up, even if it's 2 stories up, even if it's 10 apartment blocks high, you still can't do it. Even if the physical likelihood of you adjusting the wick is very, very low, nonetheless, it's prohibited in this instance because we don't alter our gezerot depending on subjective factors. So, if your lamp is 4 foot high, then it's prohibited. If it's 5 foot high, it's prohibited. If it's 6 foot high, it's prohibited. If it's 20 foot high, it's not prohibited. Well, what if it's 18 foot? What if it's 15 foot? So across the board, it's going to be prohibited. So here also, we should say exactly the same thing. We should say that according to Rav Bivi, makes no difference how high it is. That's if he's generally concerned that a person might erase something, then wherever it's placed, it's going to be prohibited. Ela ika beinai. So the Gemara suggests a different nafkamina. Ika beinahu dekatav akotel umitate. It's actually written on the wall, but it's very low down. Lamanda amashema yimchok. If we say that we're worried about perhaps you'll come to erase it, so chashina, it's low down. You could easily access it and erase it. Lamanda amashema yikra. But if we're worried about you coming as a result of this to read Shtarei Hedyotot, lo chayshinan, then that's not something we need to worry in this case. Guda b'shtara lo michlaf, because the wall and a shtar are so different that a person's not going to say, well, I read this off the wall, so now I can go and read the Financial Times. They're just not going to do that. It's totally different mediums that they are accessing to read. If you've got a list of guests or a menu scrawled on the wall in red lipstick or whatever it might be, you're not going to say as a result, okay, well, I read that, it must be all right for me to open the Financial Times. If it's on a piece of paper in front of you, then you might that might happen. But if it's written on the wall, then that's not likely to happen. And then the Gemara says, but hold on a minute. Well, Amanda Amashema Yikra, if we say the concern is that you might might come to read Shtarei Hedyotot, which is what Abaye said, Leichus Shema Yimchok. Why aren't you also worried in this case that you might erase it? In terms of that's a valid concern to have. So the Gemara goes on to give various other nafkaminas, and we don't need to go now through the entire sugya. But what we're seeing here is two concerns: a concern of Shema Yimchok, that a person might come to cross something out, and the concern that person might read from Shtarei Hedyotot. But what we're definitely seeing is that everybody seems to agree that there is, at least in principle, a prohibition of reading from Shtarei Hedyotot. Let's just skip towards the end of the Gemara, and I've marked it. It's about 10 lines up from the bottom. Tanu Rabbanan. Just want to look at one more brighter before we continue in the Gemara. So Tanu Rabbanan, we've got a brighter. Ktav ha-mahalech tachat ha-tsura v'tachat ha-dyuknaot. You've got a text that's running underneath a tsura, underneath a picture, or underneath a model. Right? So you've got you're going to a museum, or you're going to somebody's house on Shabbat, and they've got a Rembrandt on the wall, and underneath it's got the title and some information about the painting. So are you allowed to read this? Asur likroto b'Shabbat. It's prohibited to read it on Shabbat. So that's also going to be important for our discussion. And then we may as well just look at the last lines of the Gemara as well. Well, Diyukna atzmo asor af b'chol asor. This Diyukna is prohibited to look at it even during the week. Why is that? Asur af b'chol asor hishtaka mishum shene'emar. There's got a pasuk, Al tifnu el ha'elilim, don't look at false, or don't turn towards false gods. My Talmuda, how do we darshan it? Amar Rabbi Chanin, Al tifnu el midatchem. Don't turn away from what you should be focused on to something which is falsehood. In any event, to sum up the Mishnah and the Gemara, we said in the Mishnah that there's a prohibition against reading from a list. We had a machloket amoraim as to what the reason is for that prohibition, as to whether it's because we're worried that you might come to erase, or we're worried that you'll read Shtarei Hedyotot. The implication of the Gemara is that Shtarei Hedyotot, everybody agrees is prohibited. And then we said at the end that it's also prohibited to read the text underneath a picture or something like that. Now, there could be many implications for what we're talking about, because, if we've established that Shtarei Hedyotot is prohibited, and reading the Ketav underneath a picture is also prohibited, so lots of interesting questions come up. I mean, all sorts of lists that you might have. Newspapers, obviously. What about notices on the notice board in shul? That could come up as a question. What about the list of ingredients on a chocolate bar or something like that? Or reading the back of the cereal packet? Packs of cereal packets always have lots of interesting things on them. Could you read that on Shabbat? So let's bear those questions in mind as we go through the sugya. So the Rambam in Perek Kaf Gimel of Hilchot Shabbat, Halacha Yud Tet. Says here on the daf, it says Halacha Tet, but it's actually Halacha Yud Tet. Asur likrot Shtarei Hedyotot b'Shabbat. So the Rambam has told us straight out that it's prohibited to read Shtarei Hedyotot on Shabbat. Shelo yahei k'derech chol v'yavo limchok. So the reason is, and it seems to be a twofold reason that the Rambam's giving us, and that's quite important. Number one, Shelo yahei k'derech chol, that it's reading Shtarei Hedyotot is a weekday sort of activity, and also a concern, v'yavo limchok, that you might come to rub it out. So that seems to be two concerns that the Rambam's giving us as to why it is prohibited. Moneh adam paparotav et orchav mipiv aval lo min haktav kedei shelo yikra b'shtarei hedyotot. And a person can count up his guests verbally, but he can't read it from the ketav. Again, because we're concerned about Shtarei Hedyotot. The Rambam is paskening like Abaye that the issue is one of reading Shtarei Hedyotot. As an aside, we should ask the question, hold on a minute, if Shtarei Hedyotot is itself a Gzeira Shema Yavo Limchok, then reading anything else from the Ketav, in case you come to read Shtarei Hedyotot, would seem to be Gzeira Ligzeira. So I can think of two answers to that question. One is the standard answer that we use to answer such questions with, which is to say, Kula Chada Gezeirahi. That it's all one Gezeira. The other possibility is that might reflect why the Rambam is saying two things. He's saying, Shelo yehei k'derech chol v'yavo limchok. In terms of that, it's not just that we're worried that you'll come to erase, but we don't want it to be like a weekday activity. And that is not a gezerah. Lefichach im hayu hashemot chalchukin al atav lo rakotem mutar likrotan mipnei she'enu mitchalef b'shtar. So he says if what's been written out is engraved on a tabla or a kotel, a tabla is a tablet, but not the type of tablets that people write things on nowadays, a wax tablet, or it's engraved onto a wall, mutalik rotan, you could read it, mipnei she'eno mitchalef b'shtar, because that's not, that and the shtar are so distant from each other. The fact that you're reading one doesn't suggest to you that you might come to read, you might be allowed to read the other. And you also can't read the inscriptions underneath artwork on Shabbat. Okay, so that's the Rambam. So the Rambam very helpfully has told us that the reason for the Issa is Kedei Shelo Yehei K'derech Chol V'yavo Limchok, so it shouldn't be like a weekday, and that you would come to erase. Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin Zayin says as follows: if you'd bet, Zimein Orchim V'Hechin Lachem Minei Megadim. So you've got invited guests and you've prepared all sorts of food. Again, this type of thing, you've got, you're making a Sheva Brachot in the old days when we used to make Sheva Brachot, or you're making a Bar Mitzvah in the old days when you used to make a Bar Mitzvah and have lots of people for the lunch, or whatever it is. 3-day Yom Tov, you've got lots of, you need to remember what you're serving at each meal. So you've got it written out. Asolik Krotov b'Shabbat. Even if you've etched it, or look, etching is a bad example. Even if you've written it on the walls high up, so you have to sort of crick your neck to be able to see it, it's still prohibited to read it, because because we're worried that you'll come to read as a result Shtarei Hedyotot. Now, very importantly, Dahainu Shtarei Chovot v'Cheshbonot. Okay, so he's paskening like Rashi said on the daf. Okay, Shtarei Hedyotot is Shtarei Chovot v'Cheshbonot. But if it's not Shtarei Chovot v'Cheshbonot, it's going to be permissible. Now the Rama's observation is also very important. Even to look at these things without actually reading it out is also prohibited. Now, both of these points that we've made here in the Shulchan Aruch and the Rama are machloket rishonim, in terms that we said, there's a machloket rishonim what Shtarei Hedyotot is. Is it only things which are business papers? Does it include igrot shalom or not? That's a machloket, in the rishonim. And then also iyun without kriya, so reading something without saying the words, the Rama is saying is prohibited, but others say it's permitted. If it's actually been engraved into the wall, it's permissible, because you're not likely to equate that with reading Shtarei Hedyotot. But the Mechaber is paskening that if it's on a tabla or pinkas, then it's prohibited to read it, because that's too similar to a shtar. Interestingly, the Rambam said if it was chakukin ala tabla or kotel, it's mutar. We've got a machloket between the Mechaber and the Rambam about if it's engraved or etched onto something, whether or not that's similar enough to Shtarei Hedyotot, and that's the point of machloket amongst the Rishonim. Let's see a couple of points in the Rosh on this. The Rosh is going to quote Rabbeinu Yonah. The Rosh makes three important points. First important point is he says that Shtarei Hedyotot is Hainu Shtarei Mekach u'Mimkar, the Shtarei Chovot u'Mashkonot, so business papers. So that's important number. According to this, it would seem that it should be permissible to read an Igeret Shalom, a letter comes, or the newspaper. We'll talk more about it, but it would seem, according to this, a newspaper would be all right. Now he's giving us a different reason for the Issa. This is important. According to the Rambam, the reason for the Issa was lest you come to erase something. Whereas according to Rabbeinu Yonah and the Rosh, the reason for the Issa is because this is the pasuk from Yeshaya, that on Shabbat you have to be focused on Hashem's needs and spiritual needs rather than your own business concerns. Shabbat you don't talk about business, so you don't read business documents either. And that's going to inform for us what is Shtarei Hedyotot. Second paragraph in the Rosh. Now, seeing as we say that you can't even read guests off a list, makes sense to say that would also include all types of Igeret Rashut. So really what the Rosh is saying here is that we've got an Isser of Shtarei Hedyotot. You're not allowed to read Shtarei Hedyotot. Shtarei Hedyotot is business papers. So that would mean to say that the newspaper, apart from the business pages, the newspaper I can read. It's not Shtarei Hedyotot. But if we say that, we're going to be left with a certain anomaly, because we said in the Mishnah that you can't read names off a list. There's going to be, I can't read names off a list, but I can read the newspaper. Why should reading names off the list be any worse than reading the newspaper? So according to the Rosh, it's no worse. And therefore, it makes sense to say that Igrot Rashut are also prohibited, not necessarily as Shtarei Hedyotot themselves, but as a parallel to lists of guests. So you can't read the newspaper in case you come to read Shtarei Hedyotot, Shtarei Hedyotot being an absolute Isser in itself. Of course, according to the Rambam, it might be different. The Rambam might allow us to read Igarot Shel Shalom, Why might the Rambam allow us to do that? Because that might be that, seeing as the Rambam said, we're worried v'yavolim chok. So there are certain things that you rub out, and certain things you don't rub out. So Shtarei Hedyotot, business papers, yeah, I'm always crossing out things. I don't want to buy this. I've supplied this. I disagree with that charge, etc., etc. Okay, so those are going to be prohibited. That's Shtarei Hedyotot. The list of guests will also be prohibited because, no, I'm not going to invite the Goldbergs today. I hope there's nobody called Goldberg listening to the share tonight. But the newspaper, I don't take my pen and cross things out in the newspaper unless I'm a proofreader or an editor or something like that. I don't cross out the newspaper, so maybe that would be permitted. Umatzina lifluge, and in actual fact, that's kind of the Rosh himself makes a further chiluk. He rejects it, but he makes the chiluk. He says umatzina lifluge davka bahani shayach lemigzar tfei. Might be that no, it's davka with lists that you need to make the gezerah. Shahein me'inyan cheshbonot tzracha v'dam l'shtarei hedyotot tfei me'igre harashut. Might be that igrat harashut is just not similar, contextually similar, conceptually similar to Shtarei Hedyotot. Shahein divrei shalomot v'ein bahen tzorech. Now the newspaper, it's just a newspaper or a letter you get from somebody. It's a totally different concept to a bill that you get, and therefore maybe it should be permitted. His maskana says it's not permitted, but at least he raises it as a possibility. I suppose there are two types of letters that come through the postbox on Shabbat in the days when people used to get letters. Those in brown envelopes and those in white envelopes. White envelope, you want to read it. The brown envelope is a bill, so you don't want to read it. And then in the final paragraph, the Rosh discusses this question of whether the prohibition is davka kriya b'fer, actually reading it out, or whether it's just looking at it. Okay, so those are the points of contention in the Rishonim with various associated nafkaminas. Now, if we look at
a quick question. According to Rosh, what comes out that you can read on Shabbos? If we're forbidding all these things, presumably there still remains something which is permitted. So are we talking about Purim?
Kitvei HaKodesh.
Right.
Kitvei HaKodesh, and we'll see perhaps other things as well which bring to Yirat Shamayim. Yes, Sam, the notion of sitting down on Friday night after dinner with a box of Bendix, a lemon tea, and one of the newspapers, the Rosh would not have endorsed at all. And likewise to read the letters and stuff. I mean, it's not unreasonable to say that the Rosh should think on Shabbat you should pull out a Gemara and learn, and that reading stuff is not allowed. It sounds radical to us because everybody reads books on Shabbat. But maybe we shouldn't. We'll see.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's look at a Magen Avraham. So the Magen Avraham says, "Katav bach mashenoagin shashamash korei l'seuda mitoch haktav asur nahi de l'shem yimchot lekel meichash ela k'shebal hasuda ba'atzmo korei." So the Bach says, well, lots of people do read the list of guests off a list. So maybe it's because they're not actually doing it. It's the shamash. You give it to the waiter, the servant, the butler to read it out. So they haven't got the reshut to cross names off because they're not in charge of inviting people. That's the concern of the Bach. I say what Jewish people do is that's the din. Oh, if it's cheshbonot shel mitzvah, then it's permissible. You're allowed to be involved in calculations which for a mitzvah. We don't worry that you'll be involved in calculations which aren't for a mitzvah. So, for example, the Gabayim of a Gemach can get together and after shul on a Shabbat morning, socially distanced, of course, and discuss Gemach-related issues, because that's tzarech mitzvah. But you can't get together just some business partners to discuss business matters. So here also we could say that reading off the list, if you're inviting guests for a Shabbat meal and it's the shamash doing it, so then there would be room to be makel because it's tzarech mitzvah. Koshkein hakadahu gufa gezera atu shtarei cheshmonot shari b'shel mitzvah. V'ayin sham. So if you'd bet tzarchei rabim shari. So if you can give it a mitzvah dimension and get rid of the concern that it's of shema yimchok, so then there would be room to be makel. The Shulchan Aruch in Siman Shin Zayin, if you'd Gimel, tells us that Shtarei Hedyotot, Hainu Shtarei Chavot v'Cheshbonot ve'Igrat Shel She'ilat Shalom, Asur Likrotam, Afilu La'ayin Bahem B'lo Kriya Asur. So the Shulchan Aruch is machmir like the Rosh to say that it includes Igarot Shel Shalom, and even just to look at them without properly reading them or without reading them out loud is prohibited. Interestingly, Rav Osher Weiss in a Tshuva in Minchat Asher Chelek Aleph, he does make a slight chiluk between glancing at something and being ma'ayin with it without reading. So he says you've got sort of three levels. You've got reading something out loud. Okay, right, I've got to invite David Cohen, Jack Goldblatt, and Susie Levy, to my meal. That would be Kriya. Ian would be looking at it and reading out the names like that. And Habata is, the notice on the door which says way in, or entrance, or exit, or toilets, or whatever it says. Are you allowed to read those on Shabbat? According to the Rosh, you might think that you can't. Those you can, because that's not even Ian, that's Habata, he says. And the Mishnah Berurah says the reason why you can't even look at them to read them is the Yeshek Shema'ayin Shelo Yisavi Teim Binyanei Hashtarot, Mark Sheyodeh Mikva Ma Ketivba Ukedemocha Klakame. Now the Mishnah Berurah has this very interesting idea, which was possibly true 30 years ago, but certainly isn't true nowadays. And that is that if a letter's delivered to you on Shabbat, then you're allowed to open it in a permissible way, and you're allowed to read it because it might have important information on it. I remember the first time I encountered this sugya, as somebody saying, so there's a difference between a letter and a postcard. Postcards never got important information. Weather is glorious, wish you were here. I've bought your rock for you. Whereas a letter might have important information. Ploni Almoni, is ill. Your brother is engaged. We've just sold the family estate, whatever it might be. Those could be important pieces of information. Nowadays, you don't get important information in letters. As if somebody's got something important to tell me, they'll find a better way of communicating it to me than a letter. You post it in a letter, and you might never get the letter. Can't be that important. They'll pick up the phone, they'll send you an email, whatever it is. So that heter of the Mishnah Berurah actually wouldn't exist so much nowadays. Let's just look at the Shulchan Aruch Harav and then go on to Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata. So Shulchan Aruch Harav says as follows: Shtarei Hedyotot, Hainu Shtarei Chavot u'Mekach u'Mimkal Mashkonot v'Cheshbonot v'Chol Kayotzei Bahem. So Shtarei Hedyotot, that's sort of business documents. Mechafatzim ha'asurim la'asot b'Shabbat, associated with things that you can't do on Shabbat. Asur likrotam b'Shabbat mishum mimtzo cheftecha. So you can't read them on Shabbat because of mimtzo cheftecha. That was the reason that the Rosh gave. And even to read them but non-verbally is prohibited. But don't we sing Hirurim Mutarim? So you are allowed to think about things, That's only that's only where you person can't tell that that's what you're thinking about. If you're holding up the your bank statement, so then it's quite clear what you're thinking about there. As an aside, it's worth pointing out that Shtarei Hedyotot, not only can't you read them, whatever we're defining as a Shtarei Hedyotot, but also they're going to be muksa as well. So a bank statement comes through the door on Shabbat morning, something like that. It's you need to bear in mind that it's muksa. So what are our conclusions? Let's go down to Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata. Another safe. So Me'ikar adin mutar likro chadashot b'iton. So Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata says Me'ikar adin, strict letter of the law, you're allowed to read the news in the newspaper. The reason is, given is because there might be important stuff for you to know. Now, this is in itself interesting on a number of levels. And this way, the Mishnah Brura, mentions this. I think Sifkatan Samach Gimel. Number one, it's interesting to say that an awareness of what's going on is important and is a certain tzorech. Now, it might be that when the Mishnah Brura wrote that, he had in mind Tsarist Russia, and you needed to know if there was a pogrom going on or an insurrection in the next town, because you might be next, and you better start packing up on Motzei Shabbat. Or alternatively, it could be that we need to know there's COVID going on in the world. We need to know what's happening. We need to know what we should be davening for. We need to know what we should be careful about, etc., etc. Of course, there's a difference between what's on the front page of the newspaper or what's on page 15. Some of it is important to know. Some of it's not important to know, and some of it's better we don't know. So the fact that Mutalik Kroach Hadashot Beiton doesn't necessarily mean that the entire newspaper is necessarily going to be good reading material for Shabbat. Certainly can't read the business pages. You certainly can't look in the adverts and the jobs columns, the appointments columns, horaot bishul l'chayot or the recipes or the like. An interesting question came up. I remember probably 30 years ago, my late father, Alav Hashalom, was reading the business pages in the newspaper one Shabbat, and I said, so you can't do that on Shabbat. I heard to share about it, or maybe learn it in Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata, something like that. And he made the observation, no, he just reads it for interest. He's got no business interests. He doesn't have stocks and shares. He doesn't. The markets are of no interest to him. Just like sort of kind of interesting reading to see to see what's happening in the business world. And he timed probably correctly that for him it was all right. If I'm never going to cook anything, so then to read the recipes, but it gives me already a geschmack feeling, so maybe that would be all right. I'm not reading it so that I know how to cook. Yirei Shamayim should find there are better things to do on Shabbat and Yom Tov than read from the newspapers. Let's finish off with the tshuva of Rav Asher Weiss in Minchas Asher Chelek Aleph Siman Yud Tet. So he's being presented with the question that it's, I think the last one was that it's Shat Hadachak, that he should allow people to read news books and stuff. What does he call it? Shat Hadachak Gadol noch. It's a real emergency. He says that particularly, we're talking about the long summer Shabbat afternoons, And he says, for girls who they read books all the time, books and magazines all the time. What are you asking them to do on Shabbat if they can't if they can't read their books and things? So he goes through the whole sugya. At the end, he gives a number of reasons to be making. And it's interesting. I think we've sort of seen as we've gone through the sugya, every point there's a machloket on. So, Igeret of Sheilat Shalom. Well, okay, the Shulchan Aruch paskins you can't, but there are Rishonim who paskin that you can. By itself, the Shulchan Aruch paskins that you can't, but there are Rishonim that say you can. So we don't on every point, because there's a machloket Rishonim say, oh, okay, well, the Shulchan Aruch says, but I know a rabbi somewhere who says it's all right. That's I remember once somebody saying to me, oh, I know somebody in Golders Green who does whatever, as if that was a halachic proof that that's all right. They do it in Golders Green, so it must be all right. So there's a Rishon who says that doesn't necessarily make it right, but when you bundle them all together, he can see room to be made. Let's go through this. So Shabbat you should use as an opportunity to learn and not read Harry Potter. Some people would only speak Torah and Kedusha on Shabbat. So certainly, when we've got a gzeira against reading Shtarei Hedyotot, we should be machmir. Omnam b'shat hadchak hu bifrat levanot she'enam tzuvot b'talmud Torah. Yesh makom lahakel b'kriyat sfarim b'lashon hakodesh. So he says for girls who don't have a mitzvah of Talmud Torah, of course they can learn Torah if they want, but they don't have a mitzvah to learn Torah. So we could be makel, at least they could read these things in Hebrew. Number of reasons to be makel. Number one, some Rishonim say it's only business material that's prohibited. Number two, some people say that so long as you don't enunciate the words, it's permissible. Number three, some people are makel with Lashon HaKodesh because that way you're also learning, reading Lashon HaKodesh is the way of learning Lashon HaKodesh. Rav Asher Weiss wonders if this is applicable, that leniency in Eretz Yisrael, where everybody speaks Lashon HaKodesh. Magen Avraham says that certain things, if you enjoy doing them and they're not an actual malacha, so then it's going to be permissible. That's he says with regard to Sifrei Chochma, V'imudubah b'sfarim she'im Sifrei Chochma. Sorry, so that's Magen Avraham, and then he goes on to say V'imudubah b'sfarim she'im Sifrei Chochma, factual books. Yesh lakel tfei Sha'arei Shulchan Aruch Shitas HaRashba she'mekel v'HaMishnah Berurah katav she'nagu lahakel. That's talking about the astrolabe. Can you use a globe or a telescope on Shabbat? And certainly, if these are inspirational books which will inspire us to Yirat Shamayim or better moral behavior, then that's also grounds to be lenient. So, yesh makom lahakel, yesh makom lahachmir. I haven't come here to paskin halacha tonight, but to share with you the thoughts on the sugya. As I said at the outset, practical questions can be addressed to Rabbi Zobin. And thank you all for joining me this evening. I don't know if there's any questions. If not, then thank you.
Thank you very much. Mazel tov.
Baruch Teh, thank you.
Just a question from me quickly. If one is noheg b'shas adchak to read the newspaper, captions on images, do we then say that the captions on images in the newspaper would fall under the same prohibition of captions on images that we had mentioned earlier on in the shir?
You want to say that reading the newspaper is going to be permissible because there's a tzorech?
Yeah, if one takes...
Well, there could be two reasons that you'll read the newspaper. Either you could say, I'm reading the newspaper because there's a tzorech there. I'm getting something out of it, in which case that the captions might not be so relevant. The captions will be the same as an article about Megxit. It's we don't need that. We're done with that. It might be in the newspaper every third day, but we don't need that. So the captions also we don't need. Or we might say that the reason why people read the newspaper is because Nagu Lahakel, in which case it's all one hefza. I did mean to say, so I'm glad we haven't signed off yet. If I can finish with just by bringing to your attention, there's a book called My Uncle the Netziv. Many people might have them, My Uncle the Netziv. My Uncle the Netziv was written by the Torah Tamima, and it's a translation of part of his semi-autobiographical work, Makor Baruch. Anyhow, this was translated by ArtScroll and published in the 1980s. And it was given out at some sort of Lakewood event as a fundraising souvenir. Sometime later, the institution that distributed it sent out a letter saying it's been brought to our attention that this book has many things in it that people shouldn't be reading, and we're doing a recall on the book, and please send it back to us and we'll reimburse your postage. I don't know if anybody did actually send it back, but it hasn't been reprinted since. In any event, he says, I took it out of my shelf just before the shir, and then I didn't bring it up to the study, but I think it's on page 90. He says that the Netziv was a very keen reader of the newspapers. He used to get all the Jewish newspapers that were published around there, and they used to come on a Friday. He wouldn't read them on a Friday; he was too busy. Friday night was for learning, and Shabbos day after shul he would look at the newspapers. And if the newspaper didn't arrive on a Friday, he would be so upset. He would say, "Oh, this is like Tisha B'av shechaliot b'Shabbat." And so he was so upset not to have the newspaper. So, my Sarav.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Rabbi Roselaar, for joining us. I will throw myself in front of Rabbi Zabin and comment that I had the final choice on the topic, so any blame can be pointed in my direction.
I'm sorry, may I ask a question? Sorry, we don't know each other, but I was introduced to come and listen to. My name's Maurice Moses, and thank you. I found it really interesting, but I'm just trying to summarize this in my own mind. Are we basically saying? Sorry, I'll put myself on video so I'm not hiding. Yeah, are we basically saying that read a newspaper, but use your judgment about, flick through the pages if you wish. Don't dwell on things that are very obviously business if you have interest in business and what might be reported in the newspaper. Don't spend time reading gossip, but just try to pick out important events that that may important for us to know.
Well, I think what we've demonstrated this evening is that there's a range of shitot on the topic. Some would advocate exactly as you've said. Some would take a more stringent view, and some would take an even more broad-minded view. So I appreciate that's not a terribly helpful answer. But as I said at the very outset, I might have made you more confused at the end than at the beginning. But I think it's certainly an interesting topic. I think it's important to address topics like this. Firstly, in terms of, we should have an awareness that at least, even if we're reading the newspaper on Shabbat, we should at least have an awareness that there's a question about it. Yeah. And it's also of interest to see how you've got certain things, put newspapers to one side, but, I think there are very many houses where, people read books on Shabbat, on a long summer afternoon Shabbat, people take out a book and read it. And it's kind of interesting to see how, you have certain areas of halakha where the halakha Shulchan Aruch says one thing and the minhag is different. not necessarily against all shitot, but the minhag seems to be in accordance with other shitot, and it's, you know, from a learning perspective, it's interesting.
Yeah. So, but that I'm sorry to detain you, but I mean, just sort of reading a secular book, be it a fiction, a novel, or something that's non-fiction. Would you say that would not be in the spirit of Shabbat? Because, you know, many people, you know, would sort of say, do you know what, I've got a peaceful afternoon ahead of me. I know, you know, I'm so hectic during the week. It's just nice to curl up with a book, so to speak.
Yeah, I would
don't
take
know.
each case on its own
Yeah.
merits, and, you know, different people have, it's very easy to say to a Talmid Chacham, you know, on a summer Shabbat afternoon that you've got 4 hours to sit and learn. Other people, you know, find that, you know, I'll go to a shir for an hour and I'll have a chavruta for an hour, and I've still got the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah.
And I'm certainly very aware, you know, of late, you know, sort of last summer, you know, there were lots of people who were either alone or just two of them, you know, for extended periods of time. So I'm not going to be so radical as to, you know, sign a Pashkaville saying that, you know, people shouldn't read the newspapers, particularly because they couldn't read the Pashkaville on Shabbat.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Aaron Lovett. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rabbi Roselaar. Next week we will be moving on to Purim topic. We've got Rabbi Segal, who will be speaking to us about Purim Hadras Melech and how many people to listen to Megillah. Thanks very much again, Rabbi Roselaar, and hopefully we will see people next week.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Reza.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you. Part of it.
Thank you.